help as an organization, and I said Kevin's going to be all over this because Kevin's all heart. And if we can be a further liaison for you in New Jersey, and just, I think it's really special. We're really honored to have you. And without further ado, if you would just,
You want to cheer up?
No, I'll stand. I mean, if I sit, I'll get even more nervous than I already am. I will let you know I don't do this for a living, by the way. So public speaking is, a little nervous about it, but I will, say first of all, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for sharing my story. Each and every one of us have a story, and something that I tell my children almost on a daily basis is that there's three things I expect from them. And number one, they need to use their listening ears. Because again, every single person you meet has a story. Number two, they need to make sure they're using their kind words, because I will guarantee you that your history books and the path that you go on in life, never have we changed anything with hateful words. But the most important thing for me is the fact that my children and my family, we lead by example. And see, I guarantee you my story probably didn't start out like most of you. I was the youngest of 10 kids. I grew up in the Northern Virginia, D.C. area. My mother had been married 6 times, and I could probably tell you every single shelter there was in the state of Maryland, the state of Virginia, and the District of Columbia. It wasn't until I was about 9 years old that I actually remember having an address. It wasn't until I was 10 that I remember that I finally went to a school for more than 3 months. Then when I was 10, my mother died. And she died of breast cancer, and for me, I was okay with that. I was kind of pretty happy about it, because my dad died about 3 months later, and I was celebrating as a young little boy. Little did people realize, how could you celebrate the death of your parents? See, my parents were probably the worst of worst. They were addicted to drugs, they had alcohol problems, and their way of punishment was something that you all would never want to know. There were many nights that my father would hold us down and put cigarettes out on our legs, and to this day, as a 51-year-old man, I still show those scars. Or the scars that you can't see, where my father would hold a gun to my head and to my sisters and say, which one are we going to shoot first? And then as my mother would laugh as she would toke on a joint or take another sip of her drink. See, for them, that was the path they wanted their kids to go on. I also remember my father, who was such a control freak and about being a true leader, as he would say, he would hold us down and tell us that only he could tell us when to go to the bathroom, that only he had the authority to let us know when we should go to the bathroom. And when we did, the beatings were worse than you could ever imagine. 3 extension cords tied together, and the welts on our back and our arms and our legs. So the day that they died was pretty exciting for me. Little did I know that I would go into what they call foster care. See, for me, it was going to the neighbor house, the woman and her husband, who had known who I was and who had known what I had gone through and had decided to open up her door. And I know that in her heart she loved me, but it still was different. See, I remember going up that driveway with my green trash bag, and I remember opening up the door and going inside, and I remember her going through that trash bag and saying, he barely has anything to wear for church the next day. He needs to get in the shower. See, I remember getting in that shower with that green tile, and there was a bar of soap laying. A bar of soap that I was getting ready to pick up as a little boy and lather my body up with. I didn't even know what their birthdays were, much less how did I know much about them. And I tell people all the time, if you don't think there's anything wrong with that, then go to a hotel and check in and ask them to leave the bar of soap before you. Lather your body up with it and then call me and tell me how you feel. It's called dignity. It's something that we owe the 438,000 kids in the system. But at that point, my life went on. I was able to stay in a stable home, even though I had a foster father who, beat me just as bad at times as my father did, but at least I had a roof over my head. And then I turned 18. It was about a week after my 18th birthday, actually, when my foster father threw me out, and I became homeless. A senior in high school, still having the majority of my school to get through, and I literally became homeless. I slept on the streets, would hide my trash bag behind bushes. I used to have a job paying $3.35 an hour. I can tell you I'm a lot older than a lot of you. That was minimum wage back then. And at the place where I had a job, they would leave the outside door unlocked for me to sleep in at night. And I remember sleeping in that bathroom, and I remember pulling my trash bag up and using it as a pillow, and I would pray that the demons that would walk through that door at night wouldn't touch me again. See, as a teenage boy, I was a prey to those other homeless guys who lived on the streets. And it was very scary. And I went to school every single day because no matter what my community was thinking of me, no matter the fact that, I was part of those statistics, part of the fact that only 54% of kids in foster care even graduate from high school, that over 70% of girls that enter the system will be pregnant by the time they're 18, that 1 out of 3 kids in foster care become drug addicts and alcoholics. And the worst fact is that last year we incarcerated 2.6 million people. 2.2 of them were connected to the foster care system. So I knew where my community expected me to be. You expected me to be a drug addict and to live off the system and to go into juvenile detention centers, but I was like, there's no way. That is not my path. And so every single day I would go to school, and I would hope that the day I walked in that school, that the kids in the school would not make fun of me because of the holes in my shoes. I couldn't tell you the last time I had a toothbrush. See, these pearly whites I have cost me almost a year's salary because no one bothered to ever take me to a dentist until I was in my 20s. See, the fact is that kids that are in foster care, they are the invisible children. But for me, I wanted something different, and so it was time to graduate. And the one thing I remember about school was that I was always hungry. I remember going to the senior lounge, and I would wait till all the kids left the senior lounge, and I would dig through the trash, and I would gather as much food as I could out of there, because most of the kids barely took a bite out of it. But for me, I was hungry. And I remember taking that food, and I would hide it and take it back to that bathroom or behind the building that I would sleep in during the springtime. But I just knew that I had to keep my stomach full. So when everybody else was graduating from high school and I also was walking across that stage, I was the saddest day of my life. I was sad because I knew that when I was in school, there was 7 hours, there was a roof over my head. There was always, at least once a day, I was going to get food in my stomach. And every once in a while, I could sneak into that gym and take a shower without the gym teacher knowing about it. But that was all going to be gone. And what was I to do? See, I didn't have anybody coming into my English class and pulling me out of Mrs. Brown's class and saying, let's talk about college, even though, by the way, you're a B student. Because if you addressed me, then you'd have to realize there is a problem. See, so many times kids in foster care are pushed through the system, pushed through the school system, because we don't want to deal with them. See, those are the problem children, and I will tell you, there is no such thing as a problem child. It is only a child that needs to be redirected. See, I was that kid that they thought I was a problem. Even though I never had gotten in trouble, I didn't hang out in the smoking area, but people knew I was homeless. So let him get out of school, and that's what I did. And I thought, what was I going to do? Well, the only thing I could do, which was join the military. And I will repeat this, and I say this all the time. I was not proud of my country, so I did not join to protect it. I joined because I was hungry, I joined because I was cold, and I joined because I was scared. And I remember going to the MEP station at Fort Meade, Maryland, and I checked in and I got sworn into the United States Navy, and they handed me a key to the Red Roof Inn. I couldn't tell you that I'd ever stayed in a hotel in my entire life. I remember crossing the street of Route 32 and walking up to the desk at the Red Roof Inn and checking in and making sure that my key worked in the door, and I opened it, and I went in the room, and I shut the door behind me, and I locked it. And for the first time in almost 8 months, I knew no one was going to come in that room and touch me. I knew that for once I truly was safe. I remember laying across the bed and I cried for what I felt was hours just because of the feeling safe, and then getting in the shower and scrubbing my body like I had never scrubbed before. And by the way, it wasn't to get the dirt off that you all could see, but to try to remove the dirt that was inside of me. And at that particular moment is when I threw my trash bag away and said I was never going to look back on that life. And I went off to Great Lakes, Illinois, went into basic training, graduated in the top of my class at basic training, and I was just finishing my first part of my A school when I was sitting in a classroom and I literally fell over onto the floor. The next thing I remember, I had woken up in the hospital where I had had emergency surgery done to have my bladder reconstructed. See, remember I told you about my father who held me down. See, for all those years, in my mind, I felt that I had to have his permission to go to the bathroom. And so even as a teenager, when I know he was 6 feet under, I still would not go to the bathroom when I needed to. And so what happened was I ended up killing my bladder walls, had no feeling whatsoever, and my bladder ruptured. So the Navy did what a great thing they could do, which is they reconstructed my bladder. They sent me to a convalescent place for 2 weeks, and I thought life is going to be good now. I'm going to address the fact that in my mind, I should never have gotten to where I was, but I had the United States Navy standing behind me. So I went back to Great Lakes after my 2 weeks of convalescent leave and walked into my company commander's office, and he handed me a yellow envelope. And I thought that yellow envelope was me to go finish my second part of A school in Orlando. But instead, it was a one-way plane ticket to Dulles Airport, Dulles, Virginia, and 1 month pay. And they said, "We're sorry, but you're discharged." And I thought to myself, what in the hell am I going to do? I took that one-way plane ticket back to Virginia, and I had enough money from that 1 month of pay that I hitchhiked to a little town called Winchester, Virginia, where I found a hotel that I could pay $45 a week to live in. And I would hitchhike to the dart store, and I got a job there, and then I went to the public library. And I pulled out a piece of paper, and I stuck it in a typewriter. Yeah, a typewriter. And I typed. And I typed a resume. I typed a resume that was not me. Said my name, said that I went to a high school, said that I was in the Navy, but then I added stuff because I knew I needed a job. And by the way, no one was opening up the door to talk to this kid because I still looked like a homeless guy. And I went into an office and I got a job. And I remember my boss saying to me to be at work at 8 and I'd get there at 6, and to stay till 5 and I'd stay till 8. Until 3 years into my job, as I'm climbing the corporate ladder of a mortgage company, I walked into my boss's office and handed him my letter of resignation. And he said, "Why are you quitting?" And I said, "Because I lied to you." He said, "What do you mean you lied to me?" And I said, "That resume that I handed you when you hired me was all false." I said, "I didn't work those jobs." I said, "I was only a homeless teenager who went in the Navy and just wanted to make something of myself." And I remember my boss looking at me and telling me that, "You know what, Rob, in all the years, 30-some years, that he had been in that industry, he had never found somebody that was so passionate about his job and such an honest person for me." And he picked up my resignation letter and he ripped it up and said, "Get back to work." He said, "We have loans to close." I'll never forget that. And that really did give me the drive to continue forward. And that's what I did. And I climbed the corporate ladder, and I started hobnobbing with senators and congressmen, and I met the most amazing person 14 years ago. And I remember he met my biological sister and some biological family, and they would talk about my path and how I had, come from nothing. And I would say to him, "Now, if you want to stay with me, you can never repeat those stories." And he would say, "Why?" And I would say, "Because we're having dinner tonight with the mayor of DC. He would not sit down and eat and break bread with a homeless guy." And I had in my head that that's really what people thought of me until 9 years ago when it was time to be parents. See, we had done everything we wanted to do. We'd bought a brownstone in DC, restored it, we traveled the world. But the one thing I always wanted to do was to be a dad. See, I really wanted to be a dad to a child that I could look at and say, "I'm going to protect you. I'm going to love you unconditionally, and I'm going to teach you how to truly be a leader." And so for me, that was adopting a child overseas. There was no way we were going to adopt a kid from a foster care system. See, I remember those kids. And I remember Reese saying to me one morning, on a Saturday morning as we were watching Wednesday's Child, and he said, "Nick, can you explain to me why we're not adopting out of foster care?" And I said to him, "You know that I told you that we do not talk about that." And he said, "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe the problem is that you haven't spoke about it, and now look at all the children that you've done a disservice to. Wow. You want to talk about that aha light bulb moment? The tears rolled down my face because I looked at myself and realized I was a failure. I was an absolute failure. I did exactly what I thought my community was to do. I talked about those kids that they were those kids. I did not talk and let people know about my story so maybe we could help those kids. And by the way, I was one of those kids. 2 days later, I went down to DC Child and Family Services and said, I want to be a dad. I want to adopt. My partner and I, we want to be fathers. And they said, it's a 2-year waiting list. I said, are you kidding me? I said, I know how many kids are in the system. And she said, nope, 2 years. But if you become a foster to adopt, it could probably happen quicker. And so we said, let's do it. And we prepared our home. We took the classes. 6 months go by, and I get a phone call. It's a phone call to let me know that they have a little boy and a little girl. I remember saying to the social worker, now mind you, we had only said that we wanted one child. And they said, but this is a brother and sister. And Reese and I had already decided that we would never split up a brother and sister. So we said, let's do it. And they arrived. And the one thing that they arrived carrying a trash bag, just like mine. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that over 30 years had gone by and we were still using trash bags. And I said to the social worker, are you absolutely kidding me that we have not been able to get this right? She said, what are you talking about? I said, it's a trash bag. And she said, yeah. And I said, do you realize what that is doing to the mental state of a child who carries a trash bag from home to home? And she said, no. And I said, let me tell you from a kid who carried a trash bag. You feel that you're disposable. You feel that you're invisible. That is not the way we want our children to be. So, I once again stood on my soapbox and told them what I thought it could be and didn't do anything about it. And then several months later, 2 more kids arrive at our home. Grayson, who was 2, and his brother, Tristan, who was 6 months. And again, they carried a trash bag. And by the way, we were their 3rd home, and they were still carrying a trash bag. This was just something that weighed on my heart so heavy. And 4 years ago, as we were getting ready for the holidays and doing what most parents do is you want to teach your kids to give back, so we would go grab some angels off a tree, go take care of those needy kids, the ones who were in foster care. And I remember Reese saying to me, you don't seem really thrilled about adopting a family this year, which is what we did every year since the kids had come. And I said, what are we truly teaching our children? And really, how are we truly impacting our community? And I said, our community, by the way, are the over 400,000 children in foster care. And so we got our kids together and we sat down on the couch and decided to talk about how we truly wanted to impact. Now, mind you, I had a son who was 4 at the time. I had my son, Makai, who they said would never talk and would never walk. And then my daughter, Amaya, and my son, Grayson. And they sat there and we talked about just our journey in general of life. And I remember I said, God, that trash bag sucked. And my daughter, who was 9, said, yeah, Daddy, it did. She was 4, and she remembered her trash bag. I said, why don't we put together some cases and give them to just the local kids in foster care? And I said, let's talk about what we're going to bring. And when we started, the list was a mile long, and then we started narrowing it down, and we started talking about our journey and talked about the first night my daughter came where she had not smiled until we gave her the nightgown. And we talked about the fact that a book truly changes each and every one of us. And by the way, there's no such thing as a used book. It's only a book that's been loved. How many of you have bookshelves at home? How many of you? Who are you trying to impress? There is not one person that you will ever meet in your path and journey that cares that you have all those books on your shelf that, ooh, you read them. Nobody cares. Pass them on. See, again, there's no such thing as a used book. If you love that book enough to put it on your bookshelf, then pass it on to someone else. So we definitely wanted to make sure that we were going to put a book in there. A toothbrush, a toothpaste, a bar of soap, a lotion and shampoo and conditioner, because at that first night that a child comes into foster care, and by the way, I have been blessed to meet thousands of children in care, not one of them has ever come to me and said, Mr. Rob, I asked to be here. So we want to make sure on their first night they don't have to ask. We also want to make sure we give them an activity. See, most of you don't realize that 98% of the kids that enter foster care will enter in the back of a police cruiser. They come into from out of a hard situation, they're put in a holding center, then they sit there for hours. We want to make sure when they arrive at that holding center, they're given a case, and in that case, if they're children above the age of 10, they're given a journal and a pen set. And by the way, about 3 weeks ago, the National Pediatric Association came out with children that journal, that have been in foster care or adopt, will achieve higher than children who don't. I could have told them that 4 years ago, okay? I could have told them that when I picked up my first journal when I was 17. So we want to make sure they do that. Kids under the age of 10, we give them a coloring book and crayons. And so as we're going through this list, my son Grayson says, Daddy, we need to put a blanket in there. And I said, a blanket? I said, they're not cold. He said, no. He said, when they wrap themselves up in their blankie, they will know we love them. You know, the fact that he was 6 years old and he got it. He got the fact that at the end of the day, that's what each and every one of us want, is to be wanted and loved. And so we started this journey and put a couple hundred cases together just for our local foster children that we ended up doing 700 that first year. And since then, 4 years later, we have given out 30,000 cases to 31 states, including the District of Columbia, including Puerto Rico, because I have to remind people all the time, Puerto Rico does belong to us. But what an impact we've done. And I look at my 4 children now, 4 years later, and my son Grayson, who's 10, who can't wait to ever get on a stage with me whenever we're anywhere to talk about foster care. But then I also think about how we are supposed to be doing this as community leaders. See, leaders do not have the right to sit on the sideline and watch a game being played. You must get in it and play it. See, we need doers. We don't have enough. We have too many takers and not doers. I say to my kids all the time, I don't care what you do, you just have to do. Do. At the end of the day, I will tell you all this one thing. No one is ever going to remember the number of dollar signs that you have in your checking account. But what they will remember is how you truly impacted your community. And for us, it doesn't matter whether you live in my little town of Darnestown or my little goat farm, or you're in your city here. We are all part of the same community. It is not just New Jersey or just Maryland. We are one community. And at the end of the day, our forefathers built communities for only one reason, and that was not for Mrs. Smith to not paint her door pink. That was for us to take care of each other. We have forgotten that along the way, and we must get back to that. Because those children that are in foster care, they are our children. They are our tax dollars. We have to make sure that we change the statistic. Last year, only 3% of foster children went to college. Only 3%. If that happened in your community, you would have your superintendent's head on a platter. But we have allowed that numbers to stay continuous for the last 7 years. 3%. 3%. I met a girl in San Antonio, Texas just recently when I was giving a speech. She came up to me afterwards and said, I'm part of that 3% you talk about. I'm going to college. I said, you have no idea how proud I am of you. And she said, I'm scared. And I said, of course you're scared. I said, I never got to go to college. I'd be scared too. And she said, no. Where will I lay my head in December when they close the dorms? See, we don't think about things like that. We think about the fact that we've gotten a child through the system, and then we throw in some pittance, maybe even help pay for college, but then we don't worry about the fact that the growth that they need. So for me, this charity is more than just us giving a case, but it's to educate our public about what's going on in our foster care system. As I finish, I will tell you, the system is not broke. Don't ever say it, and don't ever let anyone say it to you. The system is shattered. See, broken things, I tell my children, the second drawer is the super glue. Grab it and Daddy will put that back together. But when something is shattered, it must be rebuilt. We have to rebuild our system. One case at a time, one college degree at a time, letting these children know that they care. This year, Comfort Cases will give out a scholarship, and we've given out a scholarship for the last 3 years. And this year, we're able to give a $10,000 scholarship to a foster child who will be writing me an essay of why they should deserve this. But let me tell you the one thing that's different. Just 2 days ago, I got to hear from the recipient who received our scholarship last year. And he called me to let me know that he's in Rochester, New York, going to college, and he's finished up his first semester, getting ready to start his second semester, and he's concerned about summer. And I said, why are you concerned, Esperon? And he says, my foster mom told me when I came home at Christmas time that this would be my last visit because I turned 19. And when I turn 19, she doesn't receive any more stipend. And I said to him, Esperon, Reese and I said to you the day we handed you that scholarship, you belong to our family now. So that door is open in May when you finish school and you live at the farm for the summer. But every single child should know they have a place to go. Esperon should not worry about where he's going to lay his head while he goes to college. We should worry and do what we can do. So even the smallest thing that you can do, clean off your bookshelves. The next time you go to a hotel, don't use the shampoo and the lotion and the conditioner, save it. Comfort Cases needs it. Instead of going to Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, go to Target and buy a pair of pajamas. There's so much that you can do to impact our community, and you don't even have to take your wallet out. Just remember, these are your children too. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, let's open it up.
I love questions. So I'm the youngest of 10.